So the first thing was around IR35. That was a catalyst to get the conversation going. And when you start to present to senior management that you can't truly articulate what your purchasing habits are and how can you determine who is inside or outside IR35, it raises a few eyebrows, sets a few people on edge.
Yeah.
So it was then a task of, well, how do you combat it? And we had some conversations internally in procurement, and it was around, well, we've got some MSPs that use certain VMS tools. So what does that look like? What's up and coming in the industry? And we found Zivio and Mawson's, who are our current MSP. And it was really about educating the seniors who make the decisions on how this will combat that evidence-based decision on whether or not it is inside or outside IR35. It then became really apparent the additional benefits a true system that looks at services procurement like Zivio can offer. So that was then, as I love to coin the term, it's self-service with guardrails.
Yep.
So you can have a huge volume of outsourced services, which we do in Talent, we have that volume, and being able to identify what's disguised, contingent workers. And once you've sorted that out, that was actually quite easy to deal with, because an MSP has had years of dealing with contingent workforces. We see that in lots of different roundtables and expos and things. So once that they were identified, that was triaged and dealt with. What we were left with is still a huge spend and requirement on services. So Zivio came into its own in that respect, and it was using the tool to say, right, what does good look like when it comes to articulating the services you need? How do you marry that with behaviours? How do you marry that with internal processes, DAs? Well, you know, we've got still a procurement lens on it. So how do you get value for money? And it really has been an interesting 2 years. So we're coming up into our third year, and I can absolutely say, hand on heart, it's been a fascinating journey. And we now have our teams that use the system for statements of work. We've adapted it to use something which we call safety critical. So that is where you do buy skill sets for maybe a shift or two, and that's a really fast reactive requirement. And Zivio was flexible. There was the agility to actually mold the system to answer that problem statement of how do you get someone that's potentially on their mobile phone down in the underground doing work, and they need someone for the next shift. How can they purchase that service? And we've got to the point now where we're able to do that, and it's a completely yin and yang from where we were. It's fabulous. So that's where we currently are. We're implementing the safety critical. We have statements of work. We can prove we're compliant. You know, we do have a decision tool that shows our stakeholders if it needs to be contingent worker or if it's actually a true outsourced service that they require.
And that decision tool is part of the MSP service, and they're using their expertise to program how that works.
They are indeed. So they have IR35 experts, and we've relied on them to produce a tool which they're very proud of, which they should be, and it enables us to make that initial decision to say, right, you need to follow this avenue, or you can go down through HR and go and get your contingent workforce. And then you have the true SDS determinations from there. But it really is that fork in the road that directs internal stakeholders on where they should go. And it's been really, really valuable.
And so from a technology kind of like user journey, if they go through it's the FCOS, Mawson's FCOS tool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shout out to Chris Burke and the team at Mawson for that. So effectively a user journey would be they go through the status determination within the FCOS tool, and then they either go through the vendor management system if it's a contingent workforce engagement, or they go through Zivio if it's a services procurement SOW type engagement.
Yeah.
It's brilliant to see that in practice, because a lot of people in my view, mistakenly think that's more complicated than it actually is.
Oh, it's not. It's 31 questions that you can do in 10 minutes. And you then have a certificate at the end that can be used. It's there on file as an audit trail. And you know as well as I do, audit trails are paramount to making sure that you can prove you're compliant, and having a tool where that is a one-stop shop where you can nip out, do your FCOS, come back, it records everything, go out, put your statement of work out into the supplier domain for answer, and it's just documented every single step of the way. And we've managed to load in loads of suppliers. And I think what I've heard is, well, how do you combat that pre-approved supply chain? Do you not have to go out just to anyone on Google? No, you don't. And we've locked it down, which has been a huge help. So we only use pre-approved, audited suppliers.
Yeah.
Because we're in a safety critical environment. We have to. We can't just be going out to anybody. So again, those guardrails have been laid down. And we can then safely say to a project manager, to an engineer, go and ask that question, use the portal. I've had the question, well, aren't you afraid of your own job being lost because you've got a tool that does it? No, it frees us up to do the far more complex activities. And it's just a tool. It is a fabulous mechanism to get the non-complex, high-volume churn work out there that people can do it themselves and they can learn. And what better way to have a project manager or an engineer that can write their own scope, understand how the supplier responds, and know how to articulate everything from scope to standards that are needed, milestones. If they do it themselves, they're going to have a far better program than if I do it for them. They'll actually be able to understand it far better. So we're educating people, and it's a success because we actually haven't had scope creep. We don't get settlement issues that can come from it at the end of a program because Joe Bloggs said you could do this and we've said, well, no, we can't, and we're not going to get it back from the client. You know, it stops those arguments.
And that's significant potential cost savings in amongst that as well, isn't there? Yeah, I think the self-service element is critical. Ultimately, from a scalability perspective as well, for procurement, if you've got, a sophisticated, well-educated procurement team like you guys have, it's still not going to be a massive team. So if you've got a self-service element to it and a technology enabler in the middle, then it allows you to manage that scale, keep an eye on things. The procurement team isn't getting in anyone's way. It's facilitating and adding, using the technology to just basically streamline it.
Yeah.
So as you say, it actually elevates what the procurement function can deliver, both to their internal stakeholders and the supply chain, but also in terms of the data and the compliance that is delivered to the business overall. So like you say, some people might look at it and go, oh, is this going to take away my job? No, it's just going to make your job better, really.
Absolutely. I mean, to have the time and the capacity to actually go out and have those supplier relationships, go out, find out who's new in the market, what are people up to. If we're bogged down with doing that churn of issuing scopes, looking at quotes, then when are we supposed to have time to do the more strategic bits, if you like? And that is strategic. That is looking at proposing to a business, okay, this is what your supply chain could look like. You've got X, Y, and Z now, but actually these guys are doing some great technology bits for you in the future with regards to, I don't know, CCTV or something. So let's look at them, get them in, let's have some conversations. But I couldn't do that if I was doing all of the noise and the churn that would come through. So it will get better and better. The more elements we add using Mawson and Zivio as a platform, the more we get freed up to do those SRM activities, which is fab, because that to me is where procurement should be. We are a strategic function, and it's all out there on LinkedIn with us as a community saying we are strategic, but how many times do I hear, but yeah, I'm bogged down with all of the churn?
Yeah. And this is something that I've heard SIPs talking about recently in terms of like bringing great talent into procurement and retaining great talent in procurement. I think it's impossible to do that, especially with talent coming into the market now, if you don't have effective use of processes and technology within your business. Because if you hire someone who's really smart, they're going to be data driven. Everybody is these days. And they're technology driven as well. And they'll use a lot of technology in their personal life. So if people are coming into some of these organizations where procurement are doing very manual processes and they're very transactional, I just can't see how they can retain talent. People are going to come in and think, this wasn't what I was expecting. Yeah. So if there is a more sophisticated process, that whole thing of like, is this going to take away my job? If people are working in that kind of manual transactional capacity, that's going to go away. That's the thing that's going to go away, not the strategic stuff. Just like companies are not going to be able to do that because they won't be able to get the talent to do it, and it's just totally inefficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And being in procurement for as long as I have, it's always, well, what are you going to do with your tail spend? Can you give me a list of your suppliers that do X, Y, and Z? And so many times I've been in organisations where we don't have all of that data. We have spend cubes coming out of our eyes. Absolutely, of course we do. But that knowledge of exactly what those suppliers do, what they can bring to the table, that's what we need to start focusing on when it comes to services procurement and spending the time understanding that, rather than that noise. And, the AI tool, how great is that as part of Xivio? And that, again, it helps the noise, it